everybody, for our second podcast episode of this year. And we're excited because we have a special guest on today, Taylor Hutchinson.
Thank you so much for having me.
Hello, Taylor.
Hi.
Taylor works with us in our office. Do you still have you have a desk in the Stony Plain office?
I do. So I'm in the Stony Plain office and, go there as much as I can and support the agents and
Taylor's also an avid golfer.
Try to.
He's an excellent golfer, actually.
Try to, for sure.
Taylor, why don't you tell people what you do?
Tell me a little bit about you.
Absolutely.
Other than being
He's
a great
just the guy who has an office at our office.
He also
Some guy.
helps with mortgages. But give a little quick introduction on what you do and how you can help people.
Yeah, absolutely. So my name is Taylor Hutchinson. I'm a mortgage broker. My company's Hutch Mortgages with Mortgage Architects, and been in mortgages for going on 6 years now. So it's been a bit of a journey, and I've been lucky enough to have an office in the Century 21, and be able to meet you fine people and help out as much as I can.
Fine people.
Yeah.
So sweet. So last week during our podcast, we had some discussion about interest rates.
Sure.
How that all works.
Definitely.
And I got to a point where we're like, we should just have a mortgage broker
Sure,
on because
absolutely.
we don't know all of the answers inside and out.
Sure.
So maybe why don't we start with like the basics?
Sure.
Like where's the rates come from that we pay when you borrow for a house?
Sure.
Because that's not the same as necessarily as what the Bank of Canada says or what announcements are.
Absolutely. So there's a few things that we can kind of dig into there. I mean, two types of rates. So, you're going to have the fixed rates versus the variable rates, and what are the difference between those? So the fixed rates are always based on, whether it's a 5-year fixed, 3-year fixed. They're kind of connected with the Bank of Canada bond yield rates. So what happens with that is, when bond yields drop, then, it'll reduce those fixed rates. When bond yields increase, we'll increase that. And we have seen that, recently, and I think probably get into what's causing those.
So maybe just to back up so people understand, bond yield is basically people buy bonds from the Canadian government and it yields a certain return.
Correct. So, so like as of right now, what is this? April 21st, 2026. So the bond yields are, I think this morning, it was 3.08% for a 5-year Canadian bond yield. So
somebody buys a bond from the government,
yes.
Right? And the government guarantees them over 5 years or something?
Yeah, the five. Yeah, if you're going in for 5-year or 3-year, that you do a 2-year bond. There's a percentage that you'll get from that.
So then the government goes, okay, you give us money, we'll give you a guaranteed return on that money in a certain amount of time,
yes.
Which then gives them cash. Right?
Yeah, it's like an investment, right? So it's like if you were to give $100 and then you put it in for 5 years,
you get 103.
Yeah, 103.
Right. But what it does is then it also gives the government, right, money
that they can
can spend or lend or whatever.
Exactly.
Right? That's how the beginning of the pile works. Right?
Yeah, absolutely. So with that bond yield, like when we see them increase or decrease, there's a bunch of like technical stuff within that, but the lower the rates, the lower the bonds, the lower the fixed rates, the higher the bonds, the higher the fixed rates. So, if we're sitting at like 3.08% today, what that equates to on the fixed rate side is somewhere between today you're sitting around 4.39%. So there is an increase that the banks will, put onto that 3.08% or whatever it is. And that's what they're going to lend at, right? Because when the bank takes a fixed rate mortgage, what they do is they will go and invest that on the back end. Right. So, I guess we can kind of go into, if you ever heard of someone who has a penalty on their mortgage, they break their mortgage early. There's a penalty on that. That penalty is dependent on, how much is left on the mortgage, what the rate is at that time, and then what the current rates are when the person is breaking that mortgage. So, a lot of times that will correlate, and the penalty is essentially just the amount of money that the bank is losing by having to pull out that. Yeah. So, I mean, with a penalty, it's like, that is something like typically when I'm starting my process off with a new client, I want to try and, first initially build that relationship, figure out what their goals are and, what's going to work best for them. Right. Because a lot of people will look and say, I want the lowest possible rate. Okay. Then that's fine, but, we should ask some other questions, right? Like, how long are you going to live in your property for? What's your long-term plans? And the lowest fixed rate is fine, but if you're only going to stay in your house for 2 years and sell it, then we do risk a potential penalty at the end of that, breaking it early. So strategically it might make more sense to go into a variable. The variable doesn't work the same as the fixed. So what happens is a variable rate is based off the Bank of Canada's prime rate. So there is a difference there. And
say that again. The variable rate is based off of
the Bank of Canada prime rate.
The prime rate. And the
Yes.
prime rate is based off of, sorry.
So that is the prime rate is what the Bank of Canada determines how much they're going to lend money at. So the higher the rate, like when we were, when typically, I guess a good way to think about it is like when the economy is in a less than desirable spot, we need to stimulate, we need to create more jobs. Typically the rates are going to be lower, right? Because the cost of borrowing is lower.
So they lower the rate so people spend
more money, or you have corporations that, now the money's cheaper, they can borrow it to hire on new people. Whereas, let's just take after COVID, for example, we had massive amount of inflation. The Bank of Canada was maybe a little bit slow to start increasing those rates. So we've seen them shoot up quite a bit. And when those rates go up, people will naturally not want to borrow money when the rates are significantly higher.
And hence why there was a period during COVID where the market went crazy. The real estate market went crazy because the rates were low.
Absolutely. Right. And that is
trying to stimulate the market.
Yeah, of course. So like at that point, and I'm seeing a lot of people coming up for renewal, and 2026 is a huge year for it. Massive, record year for renewals in Canada.
Right. Yeah.
But
that was because the majority of people purchased, locked into a 5-year fix.
Yeah,
and the rates were below 2%.
Yeah,
they were very low.
Between now, sorry.
Yeah, so a lot of people are coming from 2%, sub 2%, and now they're coming up to renew, and they're looking at 4.5%.
Yeah, which essentially that wouldn't double your mortgage necessarily, but it's going to go up significantly.
It'll be substantial, right?
Yeah.
So I would say in Alberta we're in a little bit of a demographic. Our mortgages aren't as big, our home prices aren't as aggressive, I would say, as some of the major hubs in Canada. But for some of those big $1 million plus mortgages, going up 2.5% is substantial.
Huge difference.
Huge difference there. And you know what? It does create. It could potentially create some issues for people, right? If there's no, over the past 5 years, if there's not an increase in income, maybe debt loads have increased, credit cards, vehicles, whatever that might look like, then, they're just you're adding more money onto that monthly obligation. And, with the cost of living anyways, it's getting tougher and tougher for people, but that is something that is coming up more and more, right?
And from my understanding, between now and I think like middle of next year or something, almost all mortgages are being renewed.
A
huge chunk of them.
It was like, what was the exact number on it? I'd have to look it up, but I believe it was like
millions.
It was millions. It was millions and millions of mortgages coming up for renewal, and many of those people coming from there's two groups of people. One coming from those 2% rates, and then others that what we would have put in 3 years ago, where they were coming from the opposite. They were coming up from almost 6%,
right.
5.
So their mortgage is getting lower.
They're coming lower, so they're all happy, right? And
right.
they've whenever you're doing a new mortgage, you have to stress test the client. So whatever the rate you're getting, it's 2% more than that. So any of those clients, like technically, people that are coming up for renewal, it's increasing. In theory, they should be able to afford it because they would have been stress tested at 5.25.
So maybe explain actually for people who don't understand what that stress test is, how it works, why it's there.
Yeah, absolutely. So when you're qualifying for a mortgage, and whether it's a fixed rate or a variable rate, whatever that might look like, when you're doing more, so let's just say you can get a mortgage for 4% right now, you're stress tested at 6%. So that will give the banks a little bit of leeway to show that in the event that something happens over the next couple of years, you're still able to fulfill that obligation.
So they're saying that if mortgage rates go up, we want to know that you can still afford it. You're not just going to go bankrupt.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. So, a good example of that, like right now, the rates, we haven't seen rates, drop even under 3% in years, right? So we're much higher than that. But when rates were, back in, before COVID, if someone was getting into a 2% rate, they actually had to stress test at 5.25%.
Oh, wow, that high.
So that was the benchmark, right? When, if anything's lower than that, 5.25%. Now that it's more than that, if you can get a rate of 4%, you're qualifying at 6%.
Wow.
So, if rates drop down, the minimum it'll be at 5.25, and then, whatever that mortgage amount is, it's 2% higher.
So ideally, that means that everybody who's coming up for a renewal should still be able to afford their mortgages.
In theory, absolutely. Now, I mean, life happens, right? And people change jobs, or life circumstances happen, and that might not be the case, and that comes into, I guess, another piece of part of my job is the renewal piece. So, the banks make the most amount of money, and it's their business to keep the clients within the banks, right? So they want to keep everyone for as long as possible. And so if we get into a situation where, clients are coming from, say, 2%, and, now it's at, like, say, 4.5%. And if they don't qualify for that anymore, maybe the income isn't where it needs to be, then at that point, they're really kind of pigeonholed into really only one option, is to stay with their current bank. So
at whatever rate
they kind of do. And typically they're not super aggressive. Like they're not going to go back and recheck income and stuff. They might check credit a little bit, but they're not going to gouge the client for that specific reason. It's just going to be like, you might not have as many options as you would have if you were still able to qualify that on your own.
Do you find that, I've seen this, but I don't know if it's common practice or not, but do you find that when people think about staying with their bank, then they're getting given this rate. Here's the rate we'll give you.
Yeah.
And then they come to you, and you should shop around and go, I can get you a way better rate. And then before you're ready to sign that stuff, their original bank goes, actually, we can do that rate.
Yeah. So that does happen, right? Because they want to keep the clients, within their walls. So, in my process now, I want to make sure that the client, we're not wasting each other's time, and, they're going to be looked after. So, a typical phone call or a conversation would be, if something's coming up for renewal, I always want to make sure that I'm seeing what the bank is offering them. And, if it's a really good rate, then, it's a transparent conversation.
You should
just stay with them. At the end of the day, I'm not going to be able to win them all, but I feel like having that conversation, being transparent, and for me, it's being a resource for anyone who phones me to be able to trust what I'm saying, right? Yeah. I mean, if I can't win it, why move someone else if it doesn't make sense?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Okay. I don't know where to go from here.
Well,
we don't need to dive right into this yet, but I feel like, making sure everyone has a good understanding, at least, of like how rates work, where they come from, why they get adjusted.
Sure. Well, and we can jump back to the variable side. I don't think we dove into that one. So, the Bank of Canada, like the variable based off the Bank of Canada's prime rate. So the prime rate is lower, and then right now the bank's prime rate is 4.45%.
Maybe first, before you dig too deep into that, make sure you explain what a variable rate really is. Like, what does that mean?
Yeah. So unlike a fixed rate, a variable rate will float with market conditions. So if we get, it's not invested like that fixed rate would be. So the penalty is different right off the bat. The variable is always capped at a 3 months interest penalty, and it'll adjust, right? So if over the past year or so we've seen reductions in the Bank of Canada. So every time that happens, your rate within a variable mortgage will reduce or increase, whatever that might look like according to what the Bank of Canada does. So if we got a 0.25% reduction here, next month or, in 2026, then everyone would see that payment and that interest drop 0.25%. Now, there are different types of mortgages within, there's different types of variable mortgage. Some will stay static payment and, more or less interest will be applied to the principal, and then others are adjustable. So then you'll get, your rate and that payment will automatically reduce to maintain the amortization or the life of the mortgage. If you started off at 25 years, you want to maintain that 25 years, whether it's increase or not. And I would say right now, strategically, there's not a right or wrong way if someone takes fixed or variable. It's very, very much personal preference. The variable rate is much lower than.
What's the variable rate?
So right now, I mean, if someone's coming in, they're putting less than 20% down payment. We should be able to get around 3.6, 3.7% on a variable rate. Maybe a little bit more, depending.
Versus a fixed is?
Versus a fixed, same thing, under 20%. I mean, we're looking at, between 4.19, 4.39.
Okay. So those numbers, though, they don't sound like that big of a difference. And actually, relatively speaking, if you were lending your own money, you would never even lend money at such a low rate. But like that difference could be a substantial amount monthly.
It absolutely it could be. So that's, to me, like right now, like I've always been a big fan of the variable. I keep my personal mortgage in a variable, and to me, the variable rates are just so much lower than the fixed rate right now. I mean, another benefit of the variable is that you can always switch from a variable into a fixed at some time in the term. At any time in the term. Without penalty. Now, if you switch it into the fixed, then you're now susceptible to a penalty afterwards if you're breaking that fixed rate. But you're going to be going from the variable into whatever the fixed rate is at that time. So it could be a strategic move. There's the turbulence, I would say kind of globally right now. So, if rates do come down, then the client always has that option to move it over. And they're going to be qualifying at less, say it's 3.6%. That can, if it's 0.6, 0.7% different from the fixed, that could be, quite a bit difference in that affordability.
So one thing I learned in my mortgage in this house is that, like, when I bought this house, my variable rate was 1.25%.
Sure.
And then COVID happened.
Yes.
A couple years in.
Yes.
And rates started climbing. And I was waiting for them to stop and come back down.
Yeah.
And it just didn't happen. And my payment ended up going up $1,100 a month was the difference.
Yeah.
Did you have to, was that at a renewal?
No, that's when I decided I got to lock in, because what you should do is when it's going up, you should lock in. And when it's coming down, you should float the variable, typically, right?
Yeah.
But it depends what your financial situation is and
that's
how comfortable
exactly.
you are with that, right?
100%.
And I was waiting up, but at a certain point, I was like, if they just keep going up, I can't just keep sucking it up, right?
Yeah.
So I locked in, and as soon as I locked in, they start going down, of course.
Yes.
And then I was stuck for 5 years, unbreakable, unless I sold my house.
Sure.
Right now, I have a mortgage broker who I use as well.
Sure.
I use Taylor and I use Ron, who we had actually, I think, on the other podcast a long time ago. Anyways, he was able to convince them to allow me to break mine early.
Sure.
As long as I stayed with them, and I just recently renewed at a much lower rate.
Yeah. Well, and that is the fix. And the reality is that for most people, like, as long as you can make that payment, like, we're in a different kind of economical situation now where, what we might see increases, decreases, but when the rates are, when the rates are 1.5%, I mean, it's really not conducive to like a healthy, economic state.
Yeah.
Like, whereas right now, if things are sitting around, 3.5%, 4%, that is probably where it should be,
and it's basically free money. People just don't look at it that way, because we're so used to such low rates.
Yeah.
But like I just said, you would never lend hundreds of thousands of dollars to anybody for a 3% return on your money.
Right.
You could get it more almost sitting in your bank account.
Definitely.
Right? Yeah.
Yeah. Some of those institutions have pretty favorable just accounts.
Or like you said, the bonds. You can just buy the bonds and you have a guaranteed rate, right?
Yeah. Or like a GIC or something.
Yeah.
You can go put it in there.
Or just put it into the market.
Or put it in the market like April does.
Yeah.
Well, and to your point earlier, Taylor, like, when we start seeing low rates, because there's something worse going on in the economy. So we really don't want that.
Yeah.
Because
Right.
it means that there's something else going on that isn't really great. Like,
That's right.
Right,
Yeah.
and I want to get to that,
Sure.
but I just want to clarify a couple quick points about it. The overnight rate, what does that mean?
So that would be the Bank of Canada's.
And why do they call it an overnight rate?
So that is the rate where the the banks will buy money off of each other. So they typically do it like, after hours. So it's the overnight rate because that is
When the transaction.
transaction. Because like banks will lend money to other banks, depending on what they need and what their demand is or whatever the situation. But they will trade money back and forth to each other. So overnight rate, prime rate, one and the same.
Okay, they're the same.
Correct.
Prime rate and overnight rate are the same.
Yeah.
They mean the same thing. Okay.
Correct. And then there's so the overnight rate or the Bank of Canada prime rate is not what we're paying. So like that's a question that comes up and they're like, oh, the Bank of Canada rate is
Prime plus or prime
Yeah,
minus.
so whatever the Bank of Canada's rate is, it's not the same as what the bank's prime rate is, what a mortgage is based off of.
Right.
So
So a prime and overnight are not the same, or they are the same?
no,
you
so
say?
there's two different things. So like there's like the Bank of Canada's prime rate and the overnight one and the same. Now that is what they set it to be. Now when a bank, because they have to make money on whatever that is, so the bank boosts up their rates. So there's a bank prime and then there's the Bank of Canada prime.
Right.
So the bank's
where the
prime
confusion
is
gets.
4.45%.
Right.
So a good question would be like, someone says, hey, I seen the Bank of Canada drop the rates 0.25%. I want to get it at 2.25%. And they're like, well, that's not how it works. That's not how it works.
Right.
And
Because the difference is, and this part I don't know for sure. Correct me if I'm
Sure.
wrong. We'll just
Sure.
put that out.
Sure.
The bank is borrowing the money, if not from another bank, from the government, right? And then there's a spread between what they lend it out at and what they borrow it at.
For sure. Well,
Is that
and
right?
yeah, the banks are very good at making money,
Yeah.
and they're not going to lend it for the same that they're getting it from.
No, that doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
Yeah. They have to make a spread, right? So
Yes.
like if for numbers' sake, if the Bank of Canada is 3%, then they're going to lend it out at 4%. Really, they got none of their own skin in the game. They're just making 1% on the difference, right? And then they'll have incentive to lend out however many billions of dollars this quarter to make that 1% a large amount
Well, and
of
it's
money.
more, and there's there's compounding.
Right.
Every institution has like a different compounding.
There's a lot of different ways,
Yeah, there's
but
there's a lot of like things within that, but yeah, essentially whatever the Bank of Canada says, the banks, the institutions are going to push
Base
that up
their
a bit.
Numbers off of that.
Yeah, and then but there's a general thing. So I'm gonna have to clip this out, but I'm pretty sure. What is the Bank of Canada prime rate today? 2.25. So then the bank's rates are 4.45.
Right.
So it's 2.2% or whatever it
Right.
is.
Is what they're making on the difference.
I
Yeah.
might have to check that.
Yeah, it's hard to say. But I know one of the things that we really want to chat about today, especially with you,
Sure.
because you have lots of the information on what's going on with the interest rates. And we all know there's so much stuff going
Sure.
on in the world
Sure.
and with this war. And we kind of want to get your opinion on how that's impacting the economy, how it's
Definitely.
impacting mortgage rates, and kind of any information that you can share with us on that from your perspective and how that's impacting buyers and
Yeah, so
we'll just
I mean,
take it-
I think
take it
the biggest
from
thing
here.
right now is the war, right? So the uncertainty in the Middle East is causing investors to put money in different spots. So before the war started, we were seeing the fixed rates low. They were sub 4% across the board. Now, since that war started, uncertainty in the investment market, more people, it's pushing the bond yields up higher. So in turn, we see those rates go up. Now, how is that affecting buyers? I mean, it really comes I would say at this time, the rates are still in a reasonable time. I think especially for me, it's like I'm engulfed in this world every day. I'm looking at rates and I'm kind of hyper focused on it. But the reality is like once, most people, they want to just know exactly what it is, whether it's a good rate now. And really all we can do is make decisions based on the information we have
Right.
today. The rate going up 0.1% or 0.2% or going down that amount, I don't really think it's enough to sway someone from purchasing. It might make them reconsider whether they want to go fixed versus variable. But typically when I'm setting up a conversation with a client, like we'll go through those options, right? And I mean, right now, if you want to go fixed just because you want to know what your payment is and set it and forget it, then the fixed is a great option. You're going to know what that is. It's
easy to plan
It's
your
easy to
Yeah,
budget.
and same every single month.
Yeah, and if it goes
Bi-weekly.
down, cool. And if it doesn't, then that's fine too, right? It doesn't. It's not necessarily impacting the ability for people to borrow as much, because we can also look at the variable, right? As more of a strategic option, save the interest, go with the variable, and then I do think that once we have a resolve to this conflict, then we will see those bond yields and the fixed rates kind of drop down and settle into where they were before. But yeah, that to me is like it has caused issue. And another thing is we're seeing the price of oil increase massively. So that's going to be another piece that we can kind of dive into. I mean, we've seen inflation. I know the report just came up. So we went from 1.9 to 2.4%, which, I would say is mostly due to the oil prices. And, but something to be, I guess, note on that is that the price of oil, the price of fuel, even with that increase, I mean, the Bank of Canada raising their rate is not going to change what that inflation is. So if if the price of, food is increased, due to the price of fuel, it's not necessarily like they can't control that type of inflation by raising the Bank of Canada's interest rate. It would be, counterproductive. I mean, they could try, but I don't think it would be.
So you're saying that if they raise the rates, it wouldn't necessarily curb spending enough to
because we're still going to see inflation come from these higher gas prices.
Right, because the inflation is because of the gas prices, not because we're spending more money.
Yeah. Now, the one thing I would say is that the price of things that are increasing naturally because of those fuel costs, groceries, we might see those go down. But the issue and what I've kind of seen in the past is that it's not so much those items, it's when everyone else takes advantage of increased pricing and they're boosting up other items that aren't necessarily affected by the inflation. That would cause issues for moving those rates higher.
Yeah.
Right. Because that's a different type of inflation.
Yeah, because they're
lumping it in, but they're doing it to make more money.
Yeah, they're doing it to make more money.
Like there's a big thing right now actually in the news about bread and all these grocers doing stuff like that, right? Yeah. And then saying they're not.
Yeah.
And still doing it.
Well, and so that to me is a bigger issue, is like people trying to make advantage, maybe call it corporate greed, or just, trying to make a little bit more money. And that's what we've seen during COVID as well, right? Yeah. That's where the prices of everything went up, and not everything is affected.
And honestly, I don't think much went down either.
Well, and that's the thing, is people get so used to spending these prices that it's very hard for them to go back down. And then there's also to your point, the added cost where you have to consider transportation.
Yes.
So that's going to be the fuel costs. Our oil costs are a lot higher. So of course that's the natural inflation, but then there's,
and there's pros and cons to that too. Being in Alberta, like having higher price of oil could be economically could be good for us, but also it makes things a lot more expensive for us, which isn't necessarily good, right?
And deflation is a indication of a very poor working economy. So we technically speaking don't want even to see that.
Mm-hmm. And actually I saw, this may not be relevant to this topic, we can talk about it at least, but I saw this morning that of the G7, Canada per capita is almost double foreign investment into our country than any of the other countries per capita. So people feel more comfortable investing here than any of the other G7s by a long shot right now. I mean, and I think that's understandable considering what's going on in America right now.
Yeah.
But does investment in Canada, like as a country, affect rates at all or anything like that economically?
Not that I've seen. It might have something on it, but specifically, having foreign investment come in is not necessarily is not like the key indicator of where I don't think rates are going or where they will be going. I think it brings confidence into the market if we're getting a lot of people coming in, and it might, you introduce new jobs, and if someone can go and get a long-term job because they're building, maybe a new refinery or something, something that's going to create a well-paying job and create industry. I think that will probably affect
more
things.
Demand.
Yeah, it'll create more demand, and it'll give people confidence to maybe spend some more money.
And is more demand in the in the mortgage world a good thing? Like if everyone's looking for a mortgage, is that a good problem to have?
The banks like it.
Yeah,
and it's not a bad problem. So that in itself, the demand is not necessarily like an indicator of because the banks will just lend, if there's,
that's how they make money.
Yeah, if they're going through a boom, then they want to, they'll lend money to whoever wants it.
Right.
And if it's cheap enough, as long as clients meet the criteria, then there wouldn't be any reason to not do that. So to me, I mean, if you're having that much, that's an indicator of a relatively good economy, right? Yeah. Things are moving,
people can
stability.
Afford houses,
yeah, and it's when you get that uncertainty where people tend to save more money. Right. If we're going to a point where, if things are all over the place, even take the war when it started, it's like, hey, how long is this going to last for? Maybe we want to settle down. We want to keep a little bit of cash in the pocket just in case, or you might not go and, take a new new debts, right? You might not going to go and buy a new vehicle just because you don't know. You want to kind of see how the dust settles, but it really depends. Like that whole conflict. I mean, I think once we see like an absolute resolve to it, then I feel like kind of the weight will be off the shoulders. Things will settle down a little bit, and
so I think another thing that we really wanted to chat about today was the new home buyer GST rebate for new builds.
Absolutely, yeah. It's a new program that was introduced fairly recently, within the last month or so, and it is a program to help first-time buyers on the new build side, kind of alleviate a little bit of that stress of that 5% GST. So, in Alberta here, we really only have the GST, which is great. It helps. Yeah, no PST, no HST. We're just, it's a wild west here in Alberta, and but that makes it very favorable. People want to move here because it's relatively cheap.
There's jobs here. You can make money. It's relatively
affordable.
inexpensive.
Housing is affordable.
Housing is affordable. That's what I
Winter
also.
is 9 months of the year, but aside from
Right.
that,
If it wasn't for that, we would be the province to live in.
It would be over for all you bitches.
Yeah. I say that all the time, actually. Like, it doesn't make sense. People are always worried about, like, how can houses be so expensive? And I'm like, you got to look at the other provinces. Like Ontario, their average income is the same as ours, and their average house is nowhere near what ours is. Right?
Yeah.
We
We
could
are quite-
afford to grow a lot.
Absolutely.
we're quite affordable, and I mean I love Edmonton. That could be a whole other podcast. I love the city.
Absolutely.
Sorry, we're getting
and I
sidetracked.
think that's why a lot of people are wanting to come to Alberta, because they see, you can still get a home for
a good standard of living.
a reasonable price. You can still able to, enjoy other parts of life rather than all your money going right into the house and living costs. And with the GST rebate, what they've implemented is for new homes only,
up to a certain amount.
So it actually goes up to technically
$1.5 million,
1.5 million.
Yeah.
Now, I would say in my experience that's kind of a rarity for
For
someone.
a first-time buyer in Edmonton.
Yeah,
absolutely.
and typically we're seeing it with people that are coming in with less than 20% down, but if you have a $500,000 purchase price and the GST, you're able to reduce the 5%, like whatever that is. Now, I've only had a few in this because it's only been out for a few weeks, but a couple different options, and it's very much builder specific. So what I've been seeing is they're ironing out some of the kinks and stuff, but couple options. One, the client can have that GST included on the purchase price, and then they can apply for that GST rebate after. So clients are buying in Calgary. The GST the home was a little over 600,000. So there's a couple different rebates. This one specifically was equivalent to $19,000. So in this one, what they were able to do is, one, they could either have applied to get it back themselves, or in this circumstance, the builder, after the conditions were removed, they wrote an amendment to reduce that GST off the purchase price. Now, with that, I mean, there's the builder is going to want to confirm that they are first-time home buyers, right? Because I mean, you also don't want a situation where people are applying for that, then it doesn't, something maybe wasn't disclosed, and they're now trying to get that money back, or we have some kind of litigation on it. And
my understanding is that it shouldn't technically be a builder issue, even in the event that they didn't qualify, because it turns into a CRA issue in the end.
They would just have to pay that money.
So the builder is a wash. It is between the CRA and the consumer.
Yeah, and like, so for my part, like when I'm working through the applications, I've already verified that they are a first-time home buyer. So if that is even on the table, then
how do you verify that?
Well, we can, a lot of times it's through the credit bureaus, right? So, most things on a credit bureau will show up for 7 years. If someone has had a mortgage, then we can typically go back and kind of take a look at what that might look like. I mean, but, to be a first-time home buyer, you might have just not owned a home for the last 4 years, which would also requalify you as a first-time home buyer.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I thought it was
So
5
if you haven't
years,
had
but-
a home, you bought a house,
Yeah.
and you moved to another country or something, as an example,
province
for
or
5
whatever.
years, and didn't own, rented the whole time, came back, you're now first-time home buyer again?
Correct. Yes. So there's also some other circumstances too with breakdowns in relationships that you can requalify as a first-time home buyer as well.
I get that.
I have a question on that. What if you have a rental? If you have a rental and you sell the rental, but you've never lived in it, would you still be a first-time home buyer?
It depends if you like. Did you buy that rental specifically to rent it out, and you never?
Let's say
Never lived in it once.
Never lived in it.
No intent to
20%
occupy.
down.
No
20%
intent to-
down. You would have had to.
You would have had, yeah, exactly. Like it really would have depended on how it would have been set up. But I mean, if it's done the right way, never occupied a property. I mean, that's a good question. That would be something like when a file is submitted to the bank, right? Because if you're a first-time home buyer, if it's not a new build, then there are some other benefits, right? You can use your first home savings account, which is a great tool to be able to use for down payment. You can use RSPs.
What's the first home savings account?
The first home savings account is very similar to the home, so the home buyer plan would be the RSP. You can put in a maximum of $60,000. You can pull out the RSP tax free, and then use it for the purchase of a home, and then you have to repay that money back over 15 years. Now, the first home savings account, it works very similar, except it's a TFSA. So like tax-free savings account, you can put in, $8,000 a year into there to a max of $40,000. And then from there, that money you can withdraw it. You're going to get the tax benefit on it. And then you don't have to pay that one.
But can we clarify though? It's called a savings account, but it's actually an investment account. So you would put your money into it, and then it would go into the market, and then that way you would earn interest, and then you're not paying taxes on that interest. And then when you withdraw it for your down payment, there's no taxes or penalties on that as well.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, when you're like if you're taking money off your paycheck, you're putting it into a first, let's say a tax-free savings account. I would say a good note on that as well is that people. You actually have to go and invest that money yourself. Like even if you put it into a TFSA, it's just not going to sit there, or it's not going to make interest. So you can just for the tax purposes put it in there. But if it's going to be a significant amount of time, I would definitely look at whatever strategy, but put it into something within the market in there.
So that can make some money.
Exactly. But with the tax-free savings account or the first home savings account, those funds are actually able to put in. And then you can pull them out immediately. It's not like the home buyer plan where it has to be in a bank account for a specific amount of time.
90 days or something.
Yeah, and so with the first home savings account, you can put it in, withdraw it immediately, and still get that benefit from it.
That's great.
If you've never bought a house using that though, but you already have a house, it doesn't matter. You can't do that. Right?
You can. That's strictly for first-time home buyers.
But can I put money into the TFSA and use it as a down payment and take it out?
Of course, absolutely.
Not in that.
Yeah, you just don't.
There's no benefits for you to do that because a TFSA, the benefit is to put your money there and let it sit in the market for as long as possible.
Right, but if I've made a bunch of money, then I can take it out still. So really, there's no difference.
There's no difference. Like,
right? Like what would be the difference?
The difference is now you can associate money like strictly for a first-time purchase, and then you can also have extra room in your TFSA for your investments, for your retirement savings. So you're not eating through.
It's outside of the TFSA.
Yes,
it's a separate
completely
thing.
different.
Yeah. So it's basically an extra $40,000 of investment room specifically for a house.
Yeah,
so
it's a separate.
If you're maxing out your TFSA every single year, you're very good with your money, and then you want to have another investment vehicle that you can put money
I thought it was
into
inside the TFSA.
No, it's a
separate
specific.
account.
It's specifically called the first home savings account, but it is. In essence, just a tax-free savings account, but it's
called something different.
It's called different because you can use it for just the way because there's more tax benefits to it.
As homeowners, there's no benefit for us to have a first home savings account because we can't use it.
Can't buy a house.
Exactly. So
can you allocate it to somebody else? Can I do it with my kid? For my kid?
No,
can I give it to
everybody
him?
has to be of age in order to have an investment account.
Right.
You can
but if I have
gift.
it,
You can
I
money.
gift that to him from that account?
Oh, yeah, for sure.
From the new home account, even though
So if you had money and
put it into a new home savings
first
account,
home savings
whatever.
account.
Like if your child is 18 and they open it up, you can gift the money over to them.
No, it can't.
No,
it
it can't come out of mine
name.
though. I can't have my own.
Oh no. They would have to start it up in their name and then you.
Can I invest it for him though? I could do that once he's 18.
Yeah. I think like.
I can put money in his TFSA. That doesn't
Yes,
matter.
of course.
Yes.
But they have to be of age. Anyone
has
who
to
has
be
an
of
investment account needs to be of age.
Yeah.
Okay, so what I was going to get at earlier though about the GST is I worry that if I was a builder and I'm charging GST on these houses and people can afford it and now there's a GST rebate, I'm just going to up the price of the house by 5% because I know they can afford it. Now I'm going to make an extra 5%, and they don't have to pay the GST. But
Don't give the builders ideas, Ryan.
that's not, if they haven't thought of this yet.
But you know what the issue with that is then? Is that this only applies to a certain demographic of people. So if they're going to be raising the price points, how does that really... I mean, I guess they could raise the price point.
It's not changing the problem. What I'm getting at is it's not actually changing the price point. They're trying to drive people to buy houses because it's less expensive, right? But the builders know they'll already pay this money. We're already, like, they're selling so many houses a year, whether it's a first-time home buyer or not, right? They can raise it that 5%, and now they're just making an extra 5%. That's what, just like the grocery stores and their cost of goods. You know, like, they know people are going to pay it. They're not going to drop it after the fact because they know people are going to pay it.
Yeah, I guess it really depends on what that goal of the business is, right? If you're in a production, housing company, then does it make sense to increase that up? Because now if someone looks at your pricing versus, the builder right next door and they're 5% less, then they might go
5% is a huge amount.
Or the builders look at each other and go, which is what they do.
Yeah.
They're charging this, so this is what we're going to charge, right? I'm interested to see how that goes.
Yeah.
Because I wonder if it's
interesting.
actually going to spark any actual change in the housing market. I'm curious.
Yeah, that would be interesting because then it could push people out of that new build market back into resale.
Yeah, because as a first-time home buyer as well, on whether it's a new home or a previously owned home, if you're a first-time home buyer, you can also have the advantage of doing a 30-year amortization. So if you're a true first-time home buyer on any home on your purchase, you can do 30-year amortization, which does help with that monthly obligation, that monthly liability. So that's another good tool that people can take advantage of. There's that would be with like less than 20% down. There is a bit of an increased premium on the CMHC insurance or the default insurance, but that is a great way to lower those monthly costs, help a little bit more with affordability, kind of getting up in price range a little bit, or if it's a brand new build, even if someone has owned a home before, if they're going to say if they're owning a home and they decide they're going to rent it out, buy a new one. If it's a new build. If it's a new home, then they can also do 30-year amortization as well. So, there's
Even if it's not a first time.
Correct.
Oh, yeah.
Correct. So
That's what I thought.
there are some pieces out there that are helping people, lower those monthly costs and get into homes, relatively cheap. But I would say the hardest part is typically the down payment. That's always something that we.
Yeah, I always thought that, like, if they were going to really wanted to boost that stimulus, then they should lend the down payment or something like that. Like to force people into it, because that's the issue. You can make it as affordable as you want, but if they can't save the down payment, they're not going to buy a house.
So there is a program. It's called some banks offer it, some banks don't, but it's called a flex down payment. So what you can do with that is you can borrow money, against, say, a line of credit to use it for the down payment of a new home. Now,
problem is it's still a loan.
What the problem is that you're borrowing money to borrow money.
Right.
So does that change your debt ratios then?
It will change the debt rates. You have to for example, if you're looking for a $400,000 home, and you don't have down payment, but you have really good credit and you have enough, room within, say, a line of credit to be able to pull $20,000 out for the down payment, then you can pull that whole amount out. The insurance premium is higher. It costs more money to do that. But I do say, like, that is something that it is possible. Is it advised? I guess it really depends on the situation. It depends how much money someone has coming in, because some people have excellent incomes. They just don't have the ability to save as much as they want, or life circumstances happen and they just need to get into something. So it is a tool to be able to use in some scenarios that would work to get clients into homes.
Yeah, because what I think is, like, typically rent is more than a mortgage. Otherwise, there would be no landlords. Do you know what I mean? Certainly, individual landlords, right? There'd be institutional, but that would be it, right? Because you would want to cover your costs, right? And make a little bit of money, typically. Obviously, not every scenario is that way, right? So you get a lot of situations where the renter can afford a mortgage, more than what the mortgage would cost for the house that they're actually living in. This gets convoluted with suites and stuff.
We can break that down a little bit, because that's something that pops up all the time.
Okay, sure.
So renting versus owning. So I would say generally, like, that is a question. People come, hey, I've rented, my rent is $2,400. I'm able to make that payment all the time. Why can't I purchase a home? But the reality is that owning a home long-term is much more expensive than renting. The issue, like if you break down the numbers, if you were to rent for say $2,000 a month, you get the mortgage all in, maybe you're looking at $3,000 a month. If you were to take that difference of $1,000, invest it every month, you will likely be far more ahead than you would be even with the appreciation. It'll probably work out very similar, but the issue is that if someone's paying $2,000 a month, they're not investing that other money. So that's where the issue comes. And then you're not tied down. You don't have to pay property taxes. You don't have to fix anything, maintenance.
But I would argue that you are paying property taxes. You're just paying somebody else's.
Yeah.
Right? See, that's what I wonder is like, okay, if they can actually can afford it, right? Because they make enough money, and maybe maybe in a lot of the scenarios, I don't know, you would certainly know better than me, but their debt service wouldn't work.
Sure.
Because yes, they can afford it, but the bank's like, we're not going to give you 75% loan to value.
Yeah.
Like, if you can live off $500 extra a month, you go for it. But we're not going to lend you money because we don't think you can do that long term.
Yeah.
But if they can do that, but they can't afford to save the down payment.
Yeah.
That's where I think that the trouble runs in. It's like, and they could end up renting their whole lives. Lots of people do, right?
Yes,
They rent
absolutely.
their whole lives only because they could never afford the down payment. Not that they couldn't pay their mortgage, right? And I think that's where people get lost. However, if the government would go, instead of the rebate, because the rebate doesn't cost them any money. It's just not money that they're making, right? But if they had to put up the down payment, then it would cost the government money, right?
For sure.
If they could put up the down payment, even if it's just 5%, then they charge them a CMHC fee, probably, make a chunk of that back right away.
Sure.
And then now they're in the market. I think it would be better to drive people to purchase homes, to home ownership, than the other way around. But also, there maybe, again, you would know better than me, maybe there's an advantage for not everybody owning a home.
Well, and not everyone, so I would say this comes back to I would say in our societal, financial literature is not really something that's taught. It's more of a learned behavior from other parents or close friends or whoever you kind of surround yourself with. And that part is always kind of, no one really chats about it. I don't think there's an open dialogue on, what a lot of this kind of stuff means. So, it's for those clients that are renting. A lot of times they just won't pick up the phone. They'll be like, I'll never be able to find a home. Where it's like, if you can get aligned with someone who I would say has more of a teaching heart to be like, hey, you know what, let's sit down and let's make a game plan. Because sometimes all it is just sitting down and running the numbers and being like, hey, based off of this income, this is how much you can afford. This is how much you have to save for that. Making a budget. It's an incredibly easy thing to do, but I think it's overlooked by a lot of people. Is that they see how much is coming in, but they don't necessarily write how much is going out. Yeah. Right? And being able to do something detailed to be able to say, okay, you know what? There's a lot of parts out of life that you could cut out. If home ownership is an important part and it's the down payment, then like anything else, we just have to make a game plan and execute and make sure we're working towards that goal.
Yeah.
I think that financial literacy is considered by many people to be just overwhelming, so they don't even bother. That's the problem.
I agree. Yeah.
And truthfully, once you start educating yourself on it, it's very basic.
Yeah. Especially for this kind of stuff.
Not even just this stuff. I'm talking investments, first home savings account, TFSA, RSPs, all that. It's very basic. We just need to make the decision to learn about it, get some books, listen to some podcasts.
At the very
there's so much out there now.
And guess what? You can be rich.
Yeah.
At a very basic level, it really just comes to money coming in versus money going out, and how are you allocating those funds?
Right.
And a bit of discipline, I would say, right? I typically, even for myself, or tell clients, the more you give away, the less you get to keep. So if you have a vehicle payment, or and I was, myself, when I was 18, 19 years old, I didn't get into mortgages till I was a little bit older, but there's a lot of hard life lessons there where, I go out and, I'm building and I'm on site and doing whatever else. And, I go and buy a new truck, right? It's okay, that's what I need. But the reality is that
a depreciating liability.
That's a very terrible way to do it. And, it definitely takes some time to learn those life lessons. But
I remember my friend's mom saying that, why are you guys buying vehicles? You guys should buy a house. And at the time, houses were like 150 grand,
Imagine.
And I actually remember taking my real estate course, and Rami was the name of the commercial educator in that. He said, I'll never forget this. He goes, you're all going to get into real estate. You're all going to make a bunch of money. You're all going to buy a really fancy car, and you're all stupid. And you know what? He's right. And he said, buy a building and get the building to pay for your car. He was a commercial guy. He's talking at the time, certainly felt way out of, the realm of possibility. But you can even do that with a house. You can buy one and you can rent out the basement, and live in the upstairs and still buy a car at that point.
Yeah. Try and buy an asset. So, if your goal is to buy, a Corvette or a Lamborghini or some kind of nice toy, then to put your money into an asset or some kind of tool that will buy that for you. Right. So that, if you're just going to go and drop $100,000 on something, it's like,
it's not smart.
It's not.
No, but people don't know. And that's actually why lots of these athletes who are millionaires their whole lives, but from 18, not their whole lives, I shouldn't say that, from 18 until they retire at 30 at most, they don't have any financial literacy. They've had all this coming in. They've gone and bought the car cash and they bought the house and all these things. And now they go bankrupt.
Well, and I don't know if that's necessarily like anyone's fault. It's a societal issue.
100%, yeah. I'm not blaming the person, certainly.
We're in a very much need it now mentality for
Buy now, pay later too.
Well, exactly. If you look and, you're going to order something for dinner. There's sometimes options where you can pay it in installments.
Are you kidding me?
Oh yeah, it's on everything now. Actually, I was listening to a podcast about this.
Sephora for sure. Like I see the ads all the time for your
clothing
purchases.
But
dinner,
payments.
come on.
Everything you can do that
and
in.
You're paying, and so like with that portion, it's like, okay, we need it now because you're going to get that instant gratification of buying something. And then, you extend over a few payments, you're paying interest on that. It's costing you way more than it should have. When in reality, it's if you just would have waited a month and a half, and then you would have just bought it with cash and then it's yours.
Exactly. I think about that all the time. Like you can buy a vehicle in 5 years. If you save up the same amount of money monthly, actually it'll be less, cost you less money, right? Or I can just do it now and pay that money monthly now and have it now. But in 5 years, either you're giving it back because you leased it, or it's worth fucking nothing anyways.
Well, a good strategy to that, and it, I don't see it implemented really ever. But if you're able to buy a vehicle, just something. Say you can get a vehicle for $5,000. You saved up enough money to buy that vehicle. Doesn't owe you anything. Every single month, put in like whatever that average vehicle payment is, $500 a month, $600 a month. Since you've owned that vehicle, it owes you nothing. Put $600 a month in there in a bank account, even if it's just like a high interest, just something to sit there. And then when that vehicle breaks, use that money for another vehicle and upgrade from there. And then the same thing. So you're never really going into any debt for it, but you're also you're being intentional.
You're moving the needle.
Yeah. And a lot of people just don't think about
Well, it's hard.
About money that way.
It's hard. It is.
Yeah, and it is hard when we're talking about inflation and rates and all this stuff that costs money and gas
a vehicle's part of life. You need one.
And you do in Edmonton,
especially where we live. Absolutely.
Yeah, it's not really a.
But it's hard to justify. It's like, it is something that everyone needs, but it's a level of payment that you might not necessarily need.
Yeah. At what do you need?
What's the threshold?
We don't need the vehicles we're driving.
You're buying something to impress people that you don't know.
Right.
A lot of times.
And it's also not satisfying. It's like you buy it and that feels like good that day, and the next thing you know, you're just driving it like your old piece of junk.
I still really like
mine.
You do really like. I like mine too. I washed it. I feel good again.
That makes a difference, eh?
It feels great.
The shine wears off pretty quick, and at that point now you're just stuck with.
It's just just getting you point A to point B. Yeah.
Well, really,
I will say get a lot of compliments on it, but
ultimately that's the whole point of having a vehicle. Like, really, what do you need an $80,000 one?
That's like that. That's like where they start these days. Everything's $80,000.
Yeah, vehicles are.
That's
again,
not even
another.
Like you said, $5,000. I was like, I bet you can't find one. For $5,000.
I should go look.
I was thinking about
what
that.
What can you get for $5,000?
Yeah.
I don't know.
It used to be the 3,000 and under magazine like that.
Maybe push that 5,000 to 10,000.
Yeah, it's probably 10.
And even that, I don't know. It'll probably suit you for a little while,
but like to your point, I know somebody, a client of mine, who shall remain nameless, so we can keep it in the podcast, who was in a house, got divorced, owned a house, got divorced, bought them out of the house, refinanced to buy the ex out, and then felt like they didn't have enough money. So they sold their house and have been renting for, I don't know, years now, right? And the value of the house that they sold has now gone up probably $100,000. And instead, they've been paying somebody else's mortgage this entire time. And they don't make enough money to be able to save money to ever get back in the market. Unless they're with someone again. But if they're not, they will forever be a renter. Yeah. When they could be a millionaire. Eventually, those values will be $1 million for a house. Average house will be eventually $1 million, right? Sure. And I think that it's so many people because it's not, the priority isn't there. Like they're just, it makes them uncomfortable.
Well, and everyone's different in the way they look at it. Like some people, we outline different price points, and if the goal is home ownership, there has to be some flexibility there as well. It's very similar to buying a vehicle. It's like if only you've ever dreamed of driving an Escalade, and you gotta settle for something else. I mean, that's just reality of the situation. It's very similar with the home prices, where there's nothing wrong with upgrading. Getting into something that you can afford, you can still maintain that level of living that you're accustomed to, save a little bit, and then you can always move up, right? You never know if life circumstances happen, you get raises.
You can move down too.
You can also move down.
Yeah,
exactly.
And not rent, because it's interesting because we're built in this society where everyone's got to have a nice car. Like that's like, kind of built into us. You can't just drive a jalopy.
It's a status symbol for
yeah,
sure.
Yeah,
Well, and they make it so easy for you to be able to get that with loans and high interest and
quick.
And quick. Yeah, exactly. You could walk into, when I bought my vehicle, I walked into the place and I said, that's the car that I want.
And you had it today.
Kind of negotiated it. I had that
exactly,
day.
yeah.
Well, they had to fix a couple things, but I mean, I paid for it, everything, and I think I got it 2 days later.
Exactly, and then you can't do that with a house. But also, people don't look at it like that. They would never rent a car their whole lives. They'd be like, that's a crazy waste of money. But they'll rent a house their whole lives. You know what I mean? And what's crazier is that the car goes down in value.
Yeah, it's a liability.
It's a liability. It's not an asset unless it's a super rare car that you're never going to drive, right? So now it's a depreciating liability versus you could have something that's an increasing asset. Mm-hmm. We just don't look at it like that. And I think it's because one of the things is that down payment seems so out of touch for so many people. Like, I'll never be able to save up $15,000, But like to your point earlier, if you just budgeted, you for sure can.
It takes a long time, but
takes some time, but the time's going to go by anyways.
But everybody wants instant gratification.
Right. Yes.
That's
right.
the problem.
And because our society is built,
that's how we're
so
built.
easy. Well, and to your point, skip the dishes. You can do Afterpay for skip the dishes.
That's bananas to me.
It makes everything so easy that where you can get it like that. But that's why you probably see it. Like, we don't see, as realtors, we don't see the inside finances of our clients. Sure. You as the mortgage broker do. So you probably see exactly where people are sitting with their debt, with their assets, and there's probably been a change in the 6 years that you've been a mortgage broker on how much debt you're seeing then versus now.
Well, that kind of goes back to the part of people coming from those sub 2% coming up for renewal. This is a prime area where, if debts have gone up, home prices have also gone up, so you have more equity, and it might also be a good opportunity to refinance. Access some of that equity, pay off some of those debts, because regardless of what the mortgage interest rate is, if you're sitting $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 in credit card debt, you'll never, making minimum payments, you'll never pay that, and you're paying 22% on something like that. So
even just lines of credit, like smaller unsecured lines of credit, you're still never gonna
not making minimum payments.
No, and even for us, if someone has a credit card, we use 3%, because 3% of whatever that balance is eventually you would pay that off, but a minimum payment you're just covering basic interest on it. You're never going to cut into that principal.
3% a month.
3% a month, yeah, of whatever that balance is.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Taylor, for
You're very welcome.
making the trek from Stony Plain to Sherwood Park to chat with us. But this is a lot of really great information, and I know that lots of clients will really appreciate all of this. So we'll let you go, but before we do you want to tell everybody where they can find you, how they can contact you? And
absolutely. So you can visit my website, hutchmortgages.com. you can go to my Instagram at Hutch Mortgages, or email me at taylor@hutchmortgages.com, and or call me 780-340-0668, and more than happy to have a conversation and help out in whichever way I can.
Thank you for listening to another episode of Homeward, your alternative to traditional real estate. Be sure to like, comment, and hit that subscribe. And for real estate inquiries in the Edmonton area, or just to stay connected, follow at Homeward Group on IG or visit homewardgroup.ca for more.
We're here to help.